Hello, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's move on over to the story room. Hello. Welcome to Bedtime Stories with Kaybe, Episode 2 of our series of the Grimm's fairy tales. We're going to be reading two stories tonight. The first one is Tom Thumb, and the second one is titled The Fitcher's Bird. Content warning for this, for the second story. It is a rather bloody affair. Parental guidance is advised. Let's begin. Tom Thumb. There was once a poor countryman who used to sit in the chimney corner all evening and poke the fire, while his wife sat at her spinning wheel. And he used to say, "How dull it is without any children about us. Our house is so quiet, and other people's houses so noisy and merry." "Yes," answered his wife, and sighed. "If we could have one, and that one ever so little, no bigger than my thumb, how happy I should be. It would indeed be having our heart's desire." Now it happened that after a while the woman had a child who was perfect in all his limbs, but no bigger than a thumb. Then the parents said, "He is just what we wished for, and we love him very much." And they named him according to his stature, Tom Thumb. And though they gave him plenty of nourishment, he grew no bigger, but remained exactly the same size as when he was first born. And he had very good faculties. He was very quick and prudent, so that all he did prospered. One day his father made ready to go into the forest to cut wood, and he said, as if to himself, "Now I wish there was someone to bring the cart to me." "Oh, father," cried Tom Thumb, "if I can bring the cart, let me alone for that, and in proper time, too." Then the father laughed, and he said, "How will you manage that? You are much too little to hold the reins." "That has nothing to do with it, father. While my mother goes on with her spinning, I will sit in the horse's ear and tell him where to go." "Well," answered the father, "we will try it for once." When it was time to set off, the mother went on spinning, after setting Tom Thumb in the horse's ear. And so he drove off, crying, "Yap! Woo!" So the horse went on, quite as if his master were driving him, and drew the wagon along the right road to the wood. Now it happened, just as they turned a corner, and the little fellow was calling out, "Yap!" that two strange men passed by. "Look," said one of them, "how is this? There goes a wagon, and the driver is calling to the horse, and yet he is nowhere to be seen." "It is very strange," said the other. "We will follow this wagon, and see where it belongs." And the wagon went right through the forest, up to the place where the wood had been hewed. When Tom Thumb caught sight of his father, he cried out, "Look, father, here I am with the wagon now. Take me down." The father held the horse with his left hand, and with the right he lifted down his little son out of the horse's ear. And Tom Thumb sat down on a stump, quite happy and content. When the two strangers saw him, they were struck dumb with wonder. At last one of them, taking the other aside, said to him, "Look here! That little chap would make off fortune if we were to show him in town for money. Suppose we buy him." So they went up to the woodcutter and said, "Sell the little man to us, and we will take care he shall come to no harm." "No," answered the father. "He is the apple of my eye, and not for all the money in the world would I sell him." But Tom Thumb, when he heard what was going on, climbed up by his father's coat-tails, and perching himself on his shoulder, he whispered in his ear, "Father, you might as well let me go. I will soon come back again." Then the father gave him up to the two men for a large piece of money. They asked him where he would like to sit, "Oh, put me on the brim of your hat," he said. "There I can walk about and view the country and be in no danger of falling off." So they did as he wished. And when Tom Thumb had taken leave of his father, they set off all together. And they travelled on until it grew dusk. And then the little fellow asked to be set down a little while for a change. And after some difficulty they consented. So the man took him down from his hat and set him in the field by the roadside. And he ran away directly. And after creeping about amongst the furrows, he slipped suddenly into a mouse-hole, just what he was looking for. "Good evening, my masters. You can go home without me," he cried to them, laughing. They ran up and felt about with their sticks in the mouse-hole, but in vain. Tom Thumb crept farther and farther in, and as it was growing dark, they had to make the best of their way home, full of vexation and with empty purses. When Tom Thumb found they were gone, he crept out of his hiding-place underground. "It is dangerous work groping about these holes in the darkness," said he. "I might easily break my neck." But by good fortune, he came upon an empty snail shell. "That's all right," said he. "Now I can get safely through the night," and he settled himself down in it. Before he had time to get to sleep, he heard two men pass by, and one was saying to the other, "How could we manage to get hold of the rich person's gold and silver?" "I can tell you how," cried Tom Thumb. "How is this?" said one of the thieves, quite frightened. "I hear someone speak." So they stood still and listened. And Tom Thumb spoke again. "Take me with you. I will show you how to do it." "Where are you, then?" they asked. "Look about on the ground, and notice where the voice comes from," answered he. At last they found him, and lifted him up. "You little elf," said they, "how can you help us?" "Look here," answered Tom. "I can easily creep between the iron bars of the parson's room and hand out to you whatever you would like to have." "Very well," they said. "We will try what you can do." So when they came to the parsonage house, Tom Thumb crept into the room. He cried out with all his might, "Will you have all that is here?" So the thieves were terrified. "Do speak more softly, lest anyone should be awakened." But Tom Thumb made as if he did not hear them, and cried out again, "What would you like? Will you have all that is here?" So that the cook, who was sleeping in a room hard by, heard it, and raised himself in bed and listened. The thieves, however, in their fear of being discovered, had run back part of the way. But they took courage again, thinking that it was only a jest of the little fellows. So they came back and whispered to him to be serious, and to hand them out something. Then Tom Thumb called out once more, as loud as he could, "Oh yes, I will give it all to you, only put out your hands." Then the listening maid heard him, distinctly that time, and jumped out of bed, and burst open the door. The thieves ran off, as if the wild huntsman were behind them. But the maid, as she could see nothing, went to fetch a light. And when she came back with one, Tom Thumb had taken himself off, without being seen by her, into the barn, and the maid, when she had looked in every hole and corner and found nothing, went back to bed at last, and thought she must have been dreaming with her eyes and ears open. So Tom Thumb crept among the hay, and found a comfortable nook to sleep in, where he intended to remain until it was day, and then to go home to his father and mother. But other things were to befall him. Indeed, there is nothing but trouble and worry in this world. The maid got up at dawn to feed the cows. The first place she went was the barn, where she took up an armful of hay, and it happened to be the very heap in which Tom Thumb lay asleep. And he was so fast asleep that he was aware of nothing, and never waked until he was in the mouth of the cow who had taken him up with the hay. "Oh dear!" he cried. "How is it that I have got into a mill? But he soon found out where he was, and he had to be very careful not to get between the cow's teeth. And at last, he had to descend into the cow's stomach. The windows were forgotten when this little room was built, and the sunshine cannot get in, and there was no light to be had. His quarters were in every way unpleasant to him, and what was worse, new hay was constantly coming in, and the space was being filled up, and at last he cried out in his extremity as loud as he could, "No more hay for me! No more hay for me!" The maid was then milking the cow, and as she had heard a voice but could see no one, and as it was the same voice she had heard in that night, she was so frightened that she fell off her stool and spilt the milk. And then she ran in great haste to her master, crying, "Oh, master dear, the cow spoke." "You must be crazy," answered her master, and he went himself to the cow-house to see what was the matter. No sooner had he put his foot inside the door than Tom Thumb cried out again, "No more hay for me! No more hay for me!" And then the parson himself was frightened, supposing that a bad spirit had entered into the cow, and he ordered her to be put to death. So she was killed, but the stomach, where Tom Thumb was lying, was thrown upon a dunghill. Tom Thumb had great trouble to work his way out of it, and he had made a space big enough for his head to get through, when new misfortune happened. A hungry wolf ran up and swallowed the whole stomach in one gulp. But Tom Thumb did not lose courage. Perhaps, he thought, the wolf will listen to reason. And he cried out from inside of the wolf, "My dear wolf, I can tell you where to get a splendid meal." "Where is it to be had?" asked the wolf. "In such and such a house, and you must creep into it through the drain, and there you will find cakes and bacon and broth as much as you can eat." And he described to him his father's house. The wolf needed not be told twice. He squeezed himself through the drain in the night, and feasted in the storeroom to his heart's content. When at last he was satisfied, he wanted to go away again, but he had become so big that to creep the same way back was impossible. This Tom Thumb had reckoned upon, and began to make a terrible din inside the wolf, crying and calling out as loud as he could. "Will you be quiet?" said the wolf. "You will wake the folks up." "Look here," cried the little man. "You are very well satisfied, and now I will do something for my own enjoyment," and began again to make all the noise he could. At last the father and mother were awakened, and they ran to the storeroom door, and peered through the chink, and when they saw a wolf in occupation, they ran and fetched weapons, the man an axe, and the wife a scythe. "Stay behind," said the man, as they entered the room. "When I have given him a blow, and it does not seem to have killed him, then you must cut him with your scythe." Then Tom Thumb heard his father's voice and cried, "Dear father, I am here in the wolf's inside." Then the father called out full of joy, "Thank heavens that we have found you, our dear child," and told his wife to keep the scythe out of the way, lest Tom Thumb be hurt by it. Then he drew near and struck the wolf such a blow on the head that he fell down dead, and then he fetched a knife and a pair of scissors, slit up the wolf's body, and let out the little fellow. "Oh, what anxiety we have felt about you," said the father. "Yes, father, I have seen a good deal of the world, and I am very glad to breathe fresh air again." "And where have you been all this time?" asked his father. "Oh, I have been in a mouse hole, in a snail's shell, in a cow's stomach, in a wolf's inside. Now I think I will stay home." "And we will not part with you for all the kingdoms of the world," cried his parents, as they kissed and hugged their little dear Tom Thumb, and they gave him something to eat and drink, and a new suit of clothes, as his old ones were well soiled with travel. And that is the end of Tom Thumb. Hello, Thunderbird. I saw you join us a few moments ago. We have one more story tonight that we will be reading. This is the Fitcher's bird, As I said at the beginning of the stream before you joined, this one is a bit of a bloody tale, although it has a happy ending, question mark. Um, um, but, yes. So, anyone watching the VOD at home, you have been warned. Content warning. Fitcher's Bird. There was once a wizard who used to take the form of a poor man. He went to houses and begged and caught pretty girls. No one knew whether he carried them, for they were never seen more. One day, he appeared before the door of a man who had 3 pretty daughters. He looked like a poor, weak beggar, and carried a basket on his back, as if he meant to collect charitable gifts in it. He begged for a little food, and when the eldest daughter came out to him, and was just reaching him a piece of bread, he did but touch her, and she was forced to jump into his basket. Thereupon he hurried away with long strides, and carried her away into a dark forest to his home, which stood in the midst of the forest. Everything in the house was magnificent. He gave her whatsoever she could possibly desire, and said, "My darling, thou wilt certainly be happy with me, for thou hast everything thy heart can wish for." This lasted a few days. And then he said, "I must journey forth, and leave thee alone for a short time. There are the keys of the house. Thou mayest go anywhere, and look at everything except into one room, which this little key here opens. And there I forbid thee to go on pain of death." He likewise gave her an egg, and said, "Preserve the egg carefully for me, and carry it continually about with thee, for a great misfortune would arise from the loss of it." She took the keys and the egg, and promised to obey him in everything. When he was gone, she went all round the house, from the bottom to the top, and examined everything. The rooms shone with silver and gold, and she thought she had never seen such great splendor. At length, she came to the forbidden door. She wished to pass by it, but curiosity let her have no rest. She examined the key. It looked just like any other. She put it in the keyhole, turned it a little, and the door sprang open. But what did she see when she went in? A great bloody basin stood in the middle of the room, and therein lay human beings, dead and hewn to pieces. And hard by was a block of wood, and a gleaming axe upon it. She was so terribly alarmed that the egg which she had held in her hand fell into the basin. She got it out and washed the blood off, but in vain. It appeared again in a moment. She washed and scrubbed, but could not get the blood out. It was not long before the man came back from his journey, and the first things which he asked for were the key and the egg. She gave them to him, but she trembled as she did so, and he saw at once by the red spots that she had been in the bloody chamber. "Since thou hast gone into the room against my will, thou shalt go back into the room against thine own. Thy life is ended." He threw her down, dragged her hither by her hair, cut off her head on the block, and hewed her into pieces so that her blood ran on the ground. Then he threw her into the basin with the rest. "Now I will fetch myself the second," said the wizard. And again he went to the house in the shape of a poor man, and begged. Then the second daughter brought him a piece of bread. He caught her like the first, by simply touching her, and carried her away. She did not fare better than her sister. She allowed herself to be led away by her curiosity, opened the door of the bloody chamber, looked in, and had to atone for it with her life on the wizard's return. Then he went and brought the third sister. But she was clever and crafty. When he had given her the keys and the egg, and had left her, she first put the egg away with great care. And then she examined the house, and at last went into the forbidden room. Alas, what did she behold? Both her sisters lay there in the basin, cruelly murdered and cut in pieces. She began to gather their limbs together and put them in order, head, body, arms, legs. And when nothing further was lacking, the limbs began to move and unite themselves together. And both the maidens opened their eyes and were once more alive. Then they rejoined and kissed and caressed each other. On his arrival, the man at once demanded the keys and the egg, and as he could perceive no trace of any blood on it, he said, "Thou hast stood the test. Thou shalt be my bride." He now no longer had any power over her, and was forced to do whatsoever she desired. "Oh, very well," she said. "Thou shalt first take a basket full of gold to my father and mother, and carry it thyself on thy back. In the meantime, I will prepare for the wedding." Then she ran to her sisters, whom she had hidden in a little chamber, and said, "The moment has come when I can save you. The wretch shall himself carry you home again, but as soon as you are home, send help to me." She put both of them in a basket, and covered them quite over with gold, so that nothing of them could be seen, and then she called to the wizard and said to him, "Now carry the basket away, but I shall look through my little window, and watch to see if thou stoppest on the way to stand or to rest." The wizard raised the basket on his back and went away with it, but it weighed him down so heavily that the perspiration streamed from his face. Then he sat down and wanted to rest a while, but immediately one of the girls in the basket cried, "I am looking through my little window, and I see that thou art resting. Wilt thou go on at once?" He thought his bride was calling that to him, and got up on his legs again. Once more he was going to sit down, but instantly she cried, "I am looking through my little window, and I see that thou art resting. Wilt thou go on directly?" Whenever he stood still, she cried this, and then he was forced to go onwards, until at last, groaning and out of breath, he took the basket with the gold and the two maidens into their parents' house. At home, however, the bride prepared the marriage feast, and sent invitations to the friends of the wizard. Then she took a skull with grinning teeth, put some ornaments on it, and a wreath of flowers, carried it upstairs to the garnet window, and let it look out from thence. When all was ready, she got into a barrel of honey, and then cut the feather bed open and rolled herself in it, until she looked like a wondrous bird, and no one could recognize her. Then she went out of the house, and on her way she met some of the wedding guests, who asked, "O Fitcher's bird, how comest thou here?" "I come from Fitcher's house quite near." "And what may the young bride be doing? From cellar to garnet she swept all clean, and now from the window she's peering, I ween." And at last she met the bridegroom, who was coming back slowly. He, like the others, asked, "O Fitcher's bird, how comest thou here?" "I come from Fitcher's house quite near." "And what may the young bride be doing?" "From cellar to garnet she swept all clean, and now from the window she's peeping, I ween." The bridegroom wizard looked up, saw the decked-out skull, thought it was his bride, and nodded to her, greeting her kindly. And when he and his guests had gone into the house, the brothers and kinsmen of the bride, who had been sent to rescue her, arrived. They locked all the doors in the house, that no one might escape, set fire to it, and the wizard and his crew were all burned. And that is the end of Fitcher's Bird. That story is one that is a very common story in folklore. It's repeated several times. I've heard several different versions of it. There is, of course, the devil and the three wives, and the more famous version I've heard is the wizard character is a rich man named Bluebeard. There is actually a tabletop role-playing game inspired by this story called Bluebeard's Bride. I've heard it described as a game of feminine horror. It's, I think, meant for one-on-one storytelling, RPG, where one player plays the bride and the other player is, Bluebeard's house, as it were, the GM, game master. I haven't played it, but I remember listening to a podcast about it. Anyway, that is the two stories that I had prepared to read for us today. Next week, let me see. What will be next? Next week, it looks like we'll be reading Maid Maleen. I'm not familiar with that story. And The Robber Bridegroom. Those are both short. We may read The Elves after that, as it is also a short story. We shall see. Thank you for watching. The next stream will be a gaming stream on Sunday. I expect we'll be finishing A Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Path randomized. Thank you for listening. Those in the future, please remember to subscribe for more weekly bedtime stories and many gaming streams. And like this video, share it, and I will see you next time.